Welcome, everyone. Good morning. And I am just so motivated and thrilled to have all of you here. Title of our presentation is A Year Like No Other, Some Coping Skills to Adapt the remaining 2020 and beyond. I am so grateful to have not just a really dedicated colleague, Dr. Cordero, but also some really wonderful colleagues in HR who are as dedicated. And our intention is to provide you with a presentation that will highlight the stressors currently in our nation, in our community, but also some really effective, great coping skills that we can all practice in a time like this. Next slide. Rules of engagement. So everyone's camera and microphone is disabled. We are going to have time for questions, comments, and that can be posted through the chat. Outstanding questions can be follow-up on post-discussion as well. So we kind of will each take our turn and provide hopefully a complete story and also have room for discussion as well. Next slide. I will briefly introduce myself. My name is Dr. Patty Montojo. I'm a licensed psychologist and also manager of our academic and staff assistance program. And I have with me my wonderful colleagues. So if you'd like to introduce yourself, that would be wonderful.
Sure. So I'm Dr. Melissa Cordero. I'm also a psychologist at ASAP. Also started here just a few months ago, right when we all started working remotely. So I'm just so grateful to be here with all of you.
Thank you both. My name is Shira. I'm the Work-Life Resources Coordinator in Human Resources. And I'm so excited to share some resources with you and to be here today.
And my name is Jane. I am your Employee Engagement Specialist housed out of Central HR. So happy to be here with you.
Thank you all. I recently attended a town hall by the American Psychological Association, and I appreciated the way that they summed up our year, and that was our nation's perfect storm of stress. Our country has been fueled by the dangers of COVID-19, repeated instances of racial injustice, political polarization, unpredictable economy, and the list goes on. And this is in 2020. This is causing distress to continue to rise, and researchers have found that it's particularly affecting Generation Z, and that's the adults from 18 to 23. And ironically, we're at a campus that serves college students, and those are usually their ages. So I know from colleagues across campus that there is such a high need, a high mental health need, and we are really needing to work together to serve our students and also our faculty and staff during this time. Next slide, please. If you look closely at the pictures, this is a good summary of 2020. We're not done yet. We have about a month and a half left. And I imagine that the stress will increase with the increase in COVID cases. APA recently released their recent Stress in American survey. It's a fantastic, thorough report. I urge all of you to review it. We will make the slides available and the link takes you to the report, where people are reporting significantly higher levels of stress than we've ever seen in over a decade. This is why the perfect storm of stress really highlights that this doesn't seem to stop. When we think that we are done or that we receive some kind of respite, there comes another stressor. And so my hope is, as a mental health provider, is that we're able to build our resilience, that we're able to help each other, to build a community, to exchange coping skills that may work for certain stressors so that we are able to live a meaningful life. We need to be intentional about getting through these crises. We need to be conscious about our own mental health and be more mindful and intentional, especially during this time. Next slide. The long-lasting effects, and this is the reality. COVID-19 pandemic has altered every aspect of our American life, from health and work to education and exercise. Over the long term, the American Psychological Association warns the public that the negative mental health effects of the coronavirus will be serious and long-lasting. This is all reflected in the report in earlier slide, and these numbers, the COVID cases, are actually not accurate. This is a snapshot of the town hall that was only led 5 days ago. And so since then, the total cases have risen to, last night I checked, 11.3 million, and the total deaths about 247,000. And this goes to show that there's been a 3% increase in percentage of US adults ages 18 to 29, so a little bit of that Gen Z generation, who reported symptoms of psychological distress. A little bit, and I'll talk a little bit about this, but parent versus non-parent during this time, on a scale of 1 to 10, parents have indicated a higher level of stress compared to non-parents. And that's not to say that non-parents are not dealing with this perfect storm of stress. It shows, and I'll talk about it in the next slide, that there are additional stressors when there is a shutdown, or when we're having to raise children and we have to find childcare and also complete our professional duties. Next slide. A little bit about parents and the stress in America. American parents are on average feeling significantly higher levels of stress than adults without children. Parents report stressors related to education, basic needs, access to healthcare services, and missing out on major developmental milestones. What's been really difficult, what I hear from employees, clients, working parents, is that their children need those peers for social interaction. They need those developmental milestones. And during that time where school or childcare was closed, that was not taking place. And I do believe that, you know, at one point I served a lot of children at UCSF, and I do believe children, like adults, are resilient. So they will catch up. These are the constant stressors of working parents during this time. Next slide, please. Anxiety. Dr. Laura Pash is a clinical psychologist at UCSF, and she's been working with patients at a special rehab clinic for those who've been hospitalized for COVID. And what she's seeing is a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear, a lot of sadness, and a lot of sense of isolation. And what's interesting is that she says some post-COVID-19 patients describe sleep problems, distressing dreams, like waking up and feeling like you're back in the hospital, or waking up and remembering really difficult aspects of having COVID, where you felt like you couldn't breathe, you felt like you were going to die. And so if you look at the numbers, we have about approximately in our nation 11.3 million people who've contracted COVID. And so that's a substantial group that will encounter some mental health challenges. I'm not here to say that the symptoms will meet clinical criteria for a diagnosis, but even just having the symptoms of depression, anxiety, increased stress is something that we as mental health providers will need to address and provide services to increasing mental health needs. Next slide. Where we stand as psychologists, I urge all employees on campus, friends, family, to take care of their mental health the same way they care for their physical health. This is crucial more so than ever. And I think that as a field, we haven't been transparent enough with the public to understand the role of a psychologist, to understand that we aren't here to only provide individual therapy services. We're here, even here in our ASAP program, we're providing department trainings. We're offering consultation services. We're building our community together. We're helping working parents as they, on campus, as they help their children with remote instruction and also complete their own professional tasks and duties. And I think now more so than ever, we're here to assist and to educate the public. Next slide. I am a strong believer in that current times of constant stress, we need to look at the silver lining. And I think that we can do that in ways that we can help the public understand, we can help employees on campus understand the mental health impact of this perfect storm of stress. We can help build resilience, teach coping, effective coping, problem solving skills, help leadership during times of stress. I know that, in ASAP, we are providing consultation services to management, to administration, so that they have the skills to have difficult conversations with their employees, and also assist with organizational decision making and help employees feel psychologically safe. Next slide. Before I transition over to Dr. Cordero, and she will do a lovely, thorough job of talking about values and boundaries, especially during this time, is I want to emphasize that this is not a sprint, that if this was an acute crisis, we would approach it differently, that it will only last a couple of weeks. And let me tell you, we are in month 8. I mean, I don't know about you, but I cannot believe that we're in mid-November 2020. Our preparation will look different. Even as we enter 2021, we need to reference our coping skills, return to our foundational tools and values. And if I have any kind of plug, I want to emphasize that the holidays will be very different this year, I imagine, for many of us. We may not be around family or friends. It may not be the same experience that we had in 2019 or in previous years, but that doesn't mean that this is permanent. It means that this is a difficult time in our community, in our country, and that we will have that holiday season again. I want all of you to manage your expectations and know that this is a different time. I have been hearing from certain individuals where they're tired of these regulations. They said, after all the sacrifices that I've made the last 8 months, I deserve to be around my family or friends, or I deserve to have a holiday season like I did in 2019. And this is a friendly reminder that the marathon of this pandemic is still occurring. And as all you know, we recently entered the purple tier, as much of California has. And I want all of you to just, remain safe and modify those expectations as we enter and quickly approaching the holiday season.
Thank you, Patty, so much. I think that just really helps us feel validated for what all of us are going through. And so I hope that with this next part of the presentation, we can really take a moment to reflect and identify and prioritize some of our values and begin to set boundaries as a form of self-care, because this is a marathon and we're still in it. So I'm hoping that this part of the presentation will help with that. Next slide. So this is just an image to help us maybe look at this from the perspective of this overlap, and combining a recognition and an implementation of our values along with self-care and that insight, it helps build our resiliency. And so just keeping this image in mind as I talk about the various elements to trying to stay emotionally well during this really hard time. So most important is looking at what we value most this holiday. And one differentiation I like to make is what we want versus what we need. And of course, a lot of us value the same thing of family, health, physical safety, emotional safety. And we may want to be with our family and we also have to take into account what is it that we need most in order to fulfill what we have to prioritize right now, which is our health. So just an example, we may want to be with family, but don't want to risk exposing someone, especially if a partner or someone within your household is an essential worker and cannot quarantine or follow some of those guidelines. And so beginning to really evaluate and look and identify when there is a value conflict. So you value family and health, but your family's values on health are very different. Unfortunately, there's been a huge polarization with regard to how people are approaching what people feel is most important during these times. And so I really just want to highlight that there's unfortunately people that are all across the board, and that we have to take a moment and reflect and look and see what do we value most, and maybe family members and friends that we mostly spend holidays with, it may have to look different based on these differences. So looking at when there is conflict. Next slide. So most importantly is beginning to set boundaries. So once we know what is it that we value most and how can we begin to really advocate for this, we might have to set boundaries in order to preserve those values. And those boundaries are also a way to preserve our own energy. So more than just the typical stressors that we're experiencing during the holidays, maybe family conflict or just burnout of everything we have juggling, there's of course this other layer of having to set boundaries, sometimes within our own family regarding our health values. And so we're looking at boundaries in this context as a form of self-care. And there's a quote that I really love to live my life by, and I always just remind myself of this when I'm making decisions or when I'm feeling very drained. And this quote says, "Pay attention to whom and what your energy increases and decreases around, because that is the universe giving you a hint of who or what you should embrace or stray from." So this is a wonderful quote that I love to use as a way to give ourselves permission to set boundaries. Even when it's the people that we want to be around and we want to see, we might have to set a boundary in order to preserve some of these values that we need to prioritize during this hard time. Next slide. So like I mentioned before, a lot of us are approaching COVID differently. There's different health precautions that people are taking. So we might have to really have these conversations openly about what are people's precautions within your family. Does it feel like it is a positive decision or the best decision to see your family? And then of course, there's just the typical holiday and family stress that we also need to set boundaries. Want to stress that the conflict and some of the struggles that we have when we see family are also still going to be there. And so there's these various elements that we have to balance. And I think it's just a good reminder of setting boundaries across the board. And one thing that I come across a lot that when I speak to people about setting boundaries is that people get upset. People don't maybe like these boundaries being set. They may not agree. And what I really want to stress that it's okay for people to be upset with us. It's okay for us to agree, and it doesn't mean that we don't set the boundary. Most people who struggle with setting boundaries don't like boundaries being set on them. And so if you're noticing these conversations are difficult with family members or friends when you're setting these boundaries of, this is what I need in order to feel safe if you're going to come to my house, or maybe it's best that we skip this holiday together and we'll celebrate it next year, and they get upset. We may just have to have this radical acceptance of that and recognize that is their reaction, and they're allowed to have their reaction. And that doesn't mean that we have to change our value or shift the boundary that we need to set. So just allowing them to be upset. This is why it's so important to reflect on our values and approach these conversations with confidence of knowing this is what's most important. This is what's going to keep you and your family emotionally and physically well. And so I talked a little bit about radical acceptance. This is a great term to help us manage that we can't control. So we can plug this in different ways. One is this radical acceptance that this holiday is going to look different, and that we may not be able to see our family, that as much as we feel like we deserve, and of course we deserve to have a wonderful holiday and be around our family, we may also have to radically accept that it may not be exactly the way we want it to be. It may need to be the way that we need it to be in order to be healthy and for us to feel safe in it. The radical acceptance also of just other people's reactions if your values conflict, and just knowing and being really concrete and confident in those values so that you feel you can radically accept the outcome of this. Next slide, please. So I wanted just to touch briefly on communicating these boundaries, and Shira is going to go much more in depth regarding this, but I wanted just to give a few examples of how to communicate these boundaries using validation, empathizing, and really specifying what you need. We're really good at saying what we don't want, and oftentimes if we can be really solid in what we're asking of people and what we're needing, we're able to communicate more effectively, and also not feeling like you have to have all the answers. Oftentimes we can just collaboratively problem solve and not feel like we have to go into a conversation knowing exactly how we want to resolve it. We're just going in knowing exactly what we need. And so just an example of this might be, I'd love for the family to be together. This is such a hard time to balance everything that we want and feel comfortable with. If we can agree on a plan, maybe we can make it work. What do you think about? And then here are some scenarios. So some of the options that are being given by the CDC is to ask families to quarantine, to test, and then isolate. And so some people are 100% on board, and some people feel like it's excessive and they don't want to do this. And so again, it goes back to that values conflict. And if this is something that would help you feel safe, really being confident in requesting that. Another option that has been thrown out there is spending the holiday outdoors. I know this is not possible in all places of the country, but California, we're a little bit more grateful that we have good weather. So this is a possibility. Also, people bringing their own food. Some people have, talked about just it being safer to bring your own utensils, your own food. But again, this is about your own comfort level. Also shortening the time together. So there is more and more research showing just it's an exposure, it's a threshold, and being around people for longer periods of time puts you more at risk. So just making it brief can also help. And then if none of these are options, especially if your family is maybe in another city or state, and you don't feel comfortable traveling, to, of course, have that virtual Thanksgiving. I know a lot of us are zoomed out, but if we can get creative and find ways to make it fun, sharing recipes and having a virtual Thanksgiving, I know it's not ideal. We would definitely rather not have this be our last resort. But again, it's that radical acceptance that this might be what that is. Next slide, please. So I wanted just to end briefly this presentation talking about self-care and planning, being proactive, and just knowing in general holidays can be stressful. And so now, of course, this added layer of this pandemic, it is so important to just check in with ourselves and ask ourselves what we need. Check in with our bodies. This is not something we normally talk about, to slow down and really be present with what our body is needing. And so we might need to do this just moment to moment, given, like Patty was saying, this is a marathon between what's going on politically and just happening in our nation. There is so much that we're just constantly in this fight or flight, sitting on the edge of our seat, not knowing what's going to happen next. And so to really check in with our bodies, to nurture and honor what it is that we need. Is it that we need more sleep, more rest? Is it that we've been just stagnant sitting at the computer and we need movement? Or is it that we need stillness? We've just been on the go. So just really checking in and asking your body, what does it need right now? Another self-care option that I love to talk about and find it so powerful is using the senses to self-soothe. So like I mentioned, we are in this marathon have been in this fight or flight. We are just constantly on. And so we have to find ways to just regulate and ground ourselves. And so using the fine senses can be really powerful. And so we can create this in our home, looking at creating things that we look at and that brings us a sense of safety, emotional safety, physical safety. This can be pictures of family members. This can be being outside and watching the sunset. It's whatever it is for you. And then breaking it down to smell. What are those scents that bring a sense of safety? I love to have my aromatherapy with lavender oil. Some people just have that sense of safety and that feeling of being grounded when they're like baking cookies. So whatever it is for you, just something that brings you a sense of safety and comfort. Sound is also a really powerful one. And for some of you who have met me when I worked at CAPS, I would do a lot of sound meditations and do drum circles. And so for me, sound is a really powerful one. And I have little stations that I've created that help me feel more grounded. And I talked a little bit before about binaural beats. These are types of music that is more ambiance in the background that you can have while you're working or while you're cooking or while you're doing whatever it is. And it can bring a sense of calm and relaxation. And there's binaural beats for everything from for deep sleep, there's binaural beats for being focused or decreasing anxiety. So I invite you to look at that, or of course, implement whatever sound is comforting for you. Taste is another. So it could be your comfort food, could be your favorite tea, whatever it is that brings a sense of comfort. And then touch. So this can be, just a blanket that just feels comfortable. They now have weighted blankets that can be really comforting and grounding. So I just invite you to think intentionally about what these senses bring to you, and thinking about what sort of category you can focus on during these holidays, during these stressful times, to create a sense of groundedness. And then relaxation techniques. I know I've talked about these a lot in various other presentations, so I don't want to be redundant, and a lot of you have been exposed to a lot of these, but just thinking about how we can be aware of our anxiety and how we can manage that through techniques like progressive muscle relaxation, where you're tensing and relaxing your muscles to release tension that maybe you didn't know you had. A lot of us walk with shoulders up by our ears and not realize it. And then when we do these exercises where we tense intentionally and release, we actually release much more stress than we knew we were holding in our body. And then there is paced breathing, which is basically just exhaling longer than you inhale. That helps create a sense of relaxation, breathing into the diaphragm. When we're anxious, we tend to breathe into the chest. So cognizant of that belly rising when you inhale, and when you exhale, that belly releasing back down. There's a breath called square breath, just a good way to remember it. You're inhaling for 4, holding for 4, exhaling for 4, and doing it 4 times. So just an easy way to remember that technique. And then there's mindfulness apps. There's Headspace, there's a Calm app, which I heard also UCSB employees get a discount on. And then lastly, I wanted to talk about detoxing. So we have all been on Zoom. We are using online platforms for just about everything. We're all on social media, watching the news. So if we can be conscientious of how we can detox this holiday, being intentional about it. Notice the urges to just habitually pick up the phone, because that's just what we do. And we want to replace that with something that's soothing. So if you just grab the phone because it's a good distraction, can we think of another healthy distraction that doesn't involve being on the screen? So just some tips to help you during this holiday season, and then I will turn it over to Shira.
Thank you, Melissa. It's so good to get those reminders on how we can take care of ourselves and set those boundaries so that we can feel safe. We're going to talk a little bit about communicating where we are with everyone around us, and how we can do that in calm and loving ways. Next slide. So at the beginning of this pandemic, Jane used this slide, and I thought it was perfect to bring it back now to talk a little bit about this perfect storm that we are in. Patty talked about. You know, we've heard that we're all in the same boat, but it doesn't really feel like that. We're in the same storm. And again, Jane talked about this before, but your ship could be shipwrecked and someone else's might be a yacht. And so we're, you know, for some, quarantine has been kind of this optimal reflection and reconnection. And for others, it's still a desperate crisis, both financial and family, and it'll have these rippling effects that Patty talked about. You know, for some that are extremely lonely, and for others, there are way too many people in our space. So we're not in the same boat. And I want us to remember that as we think about communicating our needs, because there's no way that someone else is going to know what you need right now, unless you're communicating that. We need to be able to communicate those different needs in kind and compassionate ways. Next slide. So Melissa talked about communicating our values. And one way we can do that is to use this kind of values chart and communicating that way. So V is for validating your feelings. Remember that everyone is coming to the table with their own concerns, their fears, their frustrations, and it's important to respect those feelings while standing your ground for your own family. Being polite or, you know, isn't going to eliminate your holiday stress. But when you are as kind and loving as respectful as you can be, then the knowledge that you did the best that you could do with a tough conversation can be its own source of comfort and strength. And as Melissa said, you know, you can't control how someone else is going to react, but you can know that you did the best. You can agree with some aspect of what the other person is saying. Yeah, we really love you guys. We really want to spend time with you. And then let them know why your decision is right for you. Your job is not to try to convince your extended family that your view is the right way. It's just to explain why it's the right thing for you right now, this year. And then can you find an upside? Can you, as Patty said, can you find a silver lining? Yes, things are going to be different this year, and families absolutely are never going to agree on everything ever. But if you can try to stay positive, to find some upside of how this year might be different. And E, see how everybody can win. Can you see if you can find those middle grounds? Melissa talked about, you know, maybe everyone quarantines, or maybe it's an outdoor dinner, or maybe it's a Zoom, whatever it is. And then S is standing firm. So the bottom line is that this is a conversation. It's not a negotiation. So please don't feel pressured to do something that you don't want to do. It's important to tell your family members that this is what you will be doing. And remember, it's completely okay to have different views about how to handle things this year. Next slide. So practice makes perfect. Let's say you feel uncomfortable joining the big family holiday celebration this year and you want to politely decline. You can validate saying, I totally understand what you're saying. I agree that most people are recovering well from COVID, and our family has been really healthy. For us, though, it's really important to limit our exposure to other people, especially since our oldest has asthma. I love that the rest of you are going to be able to spend the holidays together. You'll have an amazing time. Maybe we can do a Zoom call so that we can see everyone for a few minutes, or plan to come visit in the spring if everything is calmer by then. And the most important part, to stand firm. I know it's so hard to be apart during the holidays, and we wish we felt comfortable being with everyone this year, but I think it's best to just do what they feel most comfortable doing. I know for us that has been so hard to do this year. My daughter has 10 grandparents, and that's a lot of family, right? And we live with my in-laws, so she does get to see her Nana and her grandpa every day. But other grandparents it's harder to find the middle ground. And it's harder to find spaces where they can see each other while keeping everyone safe. I want to talk a little bit about communicating your needs and expectations, both with your manager and your team, also with at home with your family members, and also with children. So first, can we share the impact? What is going on in your life? What needs do you have at home that's changing? So I love this comic strip. It's an image as part of a larger one by artist Aubrey Hirsch, titled What 1 Week of Online School is Like for My 7 and 5-year-old Kids. And if you're a parent or a manager of parents or a colleague, anybody, I do just highly recommend reading it. It's funny, yes, but it's also true for life this year. And everyone has had their lives upended by this pandemic, and the holidays are making everything more complicated. So I just want to encourage you to share the impact of what's going on in your life, the challenges, even the joys that are happening. Maybe you do get more time and that's been really special. Communicate that. Share your ability. And that may change. It might be that you are able to get a ton, you're really excited about working on a project. You have all this time because your child school has reopened. And then in a couple of weeks, it closes back down and you need to reset and refocus. Things are going to happen. Hybrid schedules are being talked about. The process and the ability that we have is going to change throughout the year. And then share your plan. Okay, yes, I know that we can't plan for every circumstance, but if you can share your plan with your manager and your team, they're going to be much more able to support you and your needs if you can share what you are capable of doing and what your plan is to handle that. And then share updates and changes. Next slide. So at home, we have to do the same things. Our needs and our expectations are going to change throughout this year. As Patty was talking about, we thought this was going to be a short period of time, right? But it's not. And so maybe it's time to reevaluate these conversations. Can we talk about with your partner or your co-parent, with your housemates, what your work status is? When do you have important meetings where it's important that you have the nice background or the quiet house? When you don't want someone vacuuming when you have to give a presentation, but you also don't want to discourage them from vacuuming, right? So how can you create those schedules ahead of time so that you're not putting yourself on mute and yelling at the person that's disrupting your meeting? Can you talk about childcare status? Do you have childcare available? Maybe it's a week-to-week discussion of who's taking care of the kids in the morning versus the afternoon, or hour by hour, depending on your schedules. Do you have that support? Talk about your children's routines and your own self-care. Melissa talked about some of the things that you can do to take care of yourself, and I want to encourage you to write down at least one thing right now that you can do this week to take care of yourself, and then communicate that with your partner and your housemates. Yesterday, I gave a presentation to some student employees, and one of the students lives with 6 other people, and so her housemates her self-care time is so important. Her housemates have called it her designated retreat time, her DRT. So I want to encourage you to find your own DRT that you can designate. Next slide. So if you have kids in the home, this time has been really hard. And what I want to say is if you can help the kids create their own holiday schedule, if you can have them help out at their level, recognize that they may be stressed and that distractions are going to happen. But if you can help them to create their own schedule that's that has something fun for them, that has something unique that maybe you wouldn't be able to do in a normal holiday crazed, going everywhere, seeing 10 grandparents kind of holiday. What can they do this year to make it special since we don't have to go anywhere? Help them out, have them help out at their level. I've said this on previous meetings, I think, but a friend of mine has her son sit in the background and take notes for her of meetings. And so, yes, it's not going to, the notes aren't going to be as exact as you would probably like them to be, but they can feel like they're helping out, and they also get to see what their parent does for a living and what that work looks like. But also things like setting the table or doing the laundry, all of those things that can help, or help them getting ready for the holidays. Maybe they're picking out a new ornament for the tree, or they're baking a traditional dish that they get to learn how to do from a grandparent on Zoom, whatever it is. Reframe those disappointments into opportunities for new traditions. Next slide. And I'll end here on making, what can we do to make this year extra special? So if we can build some of that resilience up, if we can say some of these phrases to ourselves, to our children, to our spouses, whatever it is, these can help us build the resilience that we need to get through this season of our lives. But what can we do to make this year extra special? One thing that I've done for myself is my family is Jewish, and so, but we didn't practice doing anything special for a weekly Shabbat unless we would go to a friend's house. And so this year in March, I started taking my Friday mornings to bake my Oma's, my grandmother's braided bread, our challah. And so I used her recipe, and in the morning I put together the ingredients and I mix it in a bowl, and then I let it rise while I'm doing my work. And then I go back to it and I braid it, and then I let it rise again and do some more work. And then I go back to it and put it in the oven. So throughout the day on Friday, it's preparing me for the weekend and getting ready for the day and the evening. And then at the end of the day, our family gets to enjoy the delicious homemade challah. And that's been something that's been really special this year that we didn't get to do before. Things like, what if instead of, bath with Epsom salts and bubbles, I love it. Just looking at the chat here for a moment. Let's think of one way that we are lucky this year, or one thing that we're thankful for. What is something that we can do to help someone else? And making a list of things that we will do when we can again. Or I know it's frustrating that we can't do X, Y, or Z. Acknowledging that is important. And when I'm feeling sad, it can help me, right? So Jane is going to talk about reigniting your passion.
Thanks, Shira. So what's the secret? How do we reignite our passion when the burnout is real? Well, first, we have to have a very intimate and perhaps uncomfortable conversation with ourselves to understand where we truly are in this journey. I'll be honest, because that's one of my superpowers. I experienced full-blown burnout in the fall of 2018. I worked for an organization for a decade. Mentors warned me that I would burn out. Pace yourself, they said. I got this. I always got this. That's what I replied every time. I thought it would get better if I just pushed through. It usually did. I would just get tired, out of balance. But when I saw the edge, I could always pull myself back. That approach worked just fine until, well, it didn't. I gave up my dream career at the top of my game, working for a global organization. I took 10 months to recenter myself and to put out into the world what I wanted in my next life. And it wasn't easy, but it worked. Next slide. Flash forward to good old 2020. I've come in and out of what I call mini bouts of burnout at least twice since March. Most definitely spurred on from living in COVID land, just like the rest of us. A land where I have the privilege to share my life, my home life, my work life, and my volunteer life with my partner and my fur babies in a 36-foot RV. Don't get me wrong, it's a magical life and I wouldn't give it up for the world, but it's all consuming during COVID. Next slide. Like most people who experience burnout, it felt like a strange land, like being in a constant fugue. I had been tired before, but I had never truly been burned out. It was so disorienting. I didn't know what to do. What terrified me the most, though, was the possibility of never making it back to who I knew myself to be. Vivacious, full of life, all the love to give. I live my life to elevate and celebrate others. But in caring for others, I had not adequately cared for myself or let others who wanted to care for me do so. I didn't want the passion I had for my work to be extinguished, but sometimes, tragically, we have to let the light flicker off so we may have the opportunity to relight it. I spiraled down and I hit bottom and the light flickered off. The good news is there is life after burnout and a unique opportunity to reignite your passion in the process. So maybe you're right on the edge right now, and maybe you're in a free fall. Maybe you're just right about there, right? Wherever you are, you don't have to go it alone. We're all here for you. We are a powerful community, both in numbers and in hearts. So how do you know if you're more than just tired? How do you know if you're burning out? Next slide. You know, everybody struggles with passion from time to time, but burnout moves you into a place of sustained motivation loss. Think about it. You used to have passion for what you did. Passion got you into the career you are in, and it's one of those factors that makes life and career wonderful over a long period of time. When I burned out, my passion set like the sun. I knew what I was doing was important, but I couldn't feel it anymore. And although I knew that a passionless leader could never lead a passionate movement, I couldn't fake it any longer. If you're a healthy human, you feel things. You experience highs and lows, everything. But when you're in burnout, you aren't able to feel properly anymore. Your main emotion becomes a very single tone of numbness. And it's one of the earliest signs that the edge is near. And it's not that burned out people feel zero emotion. But I know when you're burned out, the emotions you feel are often disingenuous to your being. One early sign is that little things set you off. Something like a missed exit might be a 2 out of 10 on the problem scale, but your reaction might be more like an 11. So treating small things like they are big things is a sign that something deeper is wrong. People are a mixed bag for sure. Some energize you, some don't. I get that. I'm not for everyone. But when you are burned out, you realize that nobody energizes you anymore. Not your family, not your friends, not your coworkers and your team. When nobody energizes you, it's helpful to remember they're not the root of the problem. Just dig a little deeper. And oh, the cynicism. We all become cynical as we age. We know this. This is something that happens. But cynicism does not put down full-blown roots in a healthy body and mind. So if you find that cynicism is advancing at a very rapid rate, it may be a sign. And one of the hardest aspects of burnout for me was that nothing seemed to satisfy me anymore. Sleep didn't, dancing didn't, good people didn't, exercise didn't, work didn't, food didn't. Sounds like depression, right? Well, it's also a sign that you might be burning out. And when you're burning out, the fog messes with your head. You lose the ability to think straight. It's important to remember to avoid making long-lasting decisions when you're burning out. Your emotions may make you believe that things will always be bad and there's no hope. I can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. But in these moments, you can try to implement daily check-ins. Just don't do anything everlasting. So for me, in this moment, it would be, Jane, don't quit your job. Jane, don't relocate. And Jane, don't rescue another cat. Some days, simply avoiding these 3 little things can be a major win. One sign to look for is incredibly low productivity. We are UCSB. We are productive. I know this. We are beasts. I know you. I know you out there. It's a pleasure to know you. But sometimes even writing a simple email can take longer than expected. Your pace has slowed right down and you may feel like there's a cloud between you and everything you want to get done. And if you're working long hours but producing very little of value, what you consider to be valuable, you might be burning out. In the early stages of burnout, many people turn to self-medicating to numb the pain. By overindulging, whether that's overeating or even overworking, drinking, impulsive spending, even opioids. Oftentimes, if we are burning out, we almost always choose self-medication over self-care. Remember, you've got a community here to help you through this. You're not alone. And laughing, this might sound like a really small thing, but it's actually huge. If you're burning out, you don't laugh a lot. When you're burning out, nothing seems fun or funny anymore. And as it gets worse, you even begin to resent others who enjoy their life with like full-hearted belly laughs. So if you're there, think about it. And if you're just tired, a good night's sleep or a week off will, for most healthy people, you'll bounce back. You'll feel bountiful, lots of good energy. But if you're burned out, sleep and time off no longer refuel you. You can be very well have time off when you're burned out and not feel any difference. So not being refueled when you take time off is a major sign that you're burning out. Next slide. So do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. I know it's easier said than done. I know it's a deep-seated idea that people who are passionate about their work have come to adopt. Many struggle to know what it is that they're truly passionate about, let alone how to make an income doing it. And some of us don't even have the privilege to do what we love day in and day out. And unfortunately, passion isn't something that we traditionally see in the office space. Individuality is discouraged, and people who are especially eccentric tend to wither out of the world and eventually just fade out. Next slide. But what if eccentricity is just another way of saying, be yourself? Because we all have little eccentricities somewhere, and we exude the most fun and passion when we let our freak flag fly. In eccentricity often lies innovation and vision and creativity, all the things that are incredibly invaluable. At some point in elementary school, it becomes no longer cool to show how excited you are about life. The kids who maintain their exuberance beyond the age of 8 tend to be shunned and ostracized. At such an early age, we internalize that our passion needs to be watered down so we can fit in. It's so easy to hide behind masks and to do the little things, the way everyone else does, and to be a people pleaser and to sell yourself short. But guess what? You are not being truly yourself in your business, in your relationships, in your lifestyle. You are robbing the world of your biggest gift, which is yourself. So be unapologetically you. In today's ever-changing job market, it is imperative that you stand out, not to fit in. This is why your passion, if it has died, must be reignited. So let's move on, Veronica. This is where the work happens, y'all. So try to remember what it was that made you the happiest. Name that thing that you love. For me, it was actually sunbathing in the hammock, which gave way to crafting, which gave way to painting, which gave way to laughter. And doing what you love consistently. This is important, especially if it's been a very long time. You owe it to yourself and to the world to bring your passion back into your life. Start with 1 day a week. See how it feels. See how you shift. Take that passion with you into the next day and see how you can bring it into the world by sharing the good with others. Maybe you smile more. Maybe your work is more creative. Maybe you have nothing to lose and everything to gain from doing what you love consistently. And don't wait for it. Create it. Passion comes from within. That's why it can be so elusive, because we start waiting for the world to bring passion to us rather than cultivating it ourselves. We are by nature passive, waiting for everyone to entertain us. We seem to have forgotten that we are the ones who are in charge of creating experiences for our lives. Bring something to the table and someone will invite you to theirs. By doing so, passion consistently, you're exercising your passion in your life. And get outside of that comfort zone. Go explore. Maybe you don't have the ability to do things that you normally would because obvious limitations. We're in a pandemic. I get it. But this doesn't mean you give up on your own personal passion. It means you get to start exploring. You never really know what activities or pursuits may captivate you once you engage in them. Ultimately, it's up to you to generate the passion that will inspire you and in turn, inspire everyone else. And when you master that, your self-worth will increase, and so does your net worth. 2 years later, I am enjoying what I've done more than ever, and the opportunities before me have never been greater. How much of that could I see or imagine during my burnout? Exactly 0. But I had to not give up despite that. In those moments and days where I acknowledge a mini burnout is creeping in, I cling to the idea that the sun will rise again, and so will I. And it does, and so do I. So that's my story. And I hope that in some small way, this helps you if you're on the edge, or if you're free falling, or if you're making your way back to us. Thank you. Veronica, I think we'll stop there.